In this video tutorial, I will talk about PHP functions. I will cover how to create them, how to pass arguments, how to return one and multiple values, how to create recursive functions, etc. So, stay with me. Hey, what's up guys? Senaid here from codingpassiveincome.com, the place where I help others to become a web developer much easier and faster than they will do it on their own. So, if that is something that interests you, consider subscribing. So now I'm here at my PHP store. I have created a new project called PHP Functions, and I have created an empty index.php file. Also, I have started my XM server. So what am I going to do? I will just write the normal PHP code without HTML or any other. So we will just open and close PHP tags, and now I'm going to create just one very simple functions. So how do we create functions? We will use the main word, which is function, and after that we are going to write the name of our functions. And here it's very important that when you are giving the name, it should be, when we just read the name, that we almost know what will that function do. So don't just create a function name that doesn't have any sense. Okay, it's very important when you later read the code and see the function that you know what it does. So let's say for this example I will say function test, and I will open and close, and also I will open and close brackets. So here inside those brackets we will just write the normal PHP code, which will be executed when we call this function. So when we just create this function, we can, for example, say echo hello. And now if we execute this code, you can see that we don't have anything here. It's just an empty. So in order to execute this part, we need to call the function, and basically we call it by using just this part here. So at the moment you can see that this here is empty and we don't have any arguments, but if there are some and they don't have any default value, I will show what is that in a moment, then we just called as is. So if I say here test, this means that I want that this part of the code execute. So if we test now, it says hello. Okay, and we can do it as many times as we want to, and each time it will be the same result. So as you can notice from this example, the function is a way to call some part of the code multiple times, and we can do it anytime we want to. So for example, let me now show you how to pass some arguments. So let's say I will name this function sum, okay, and I'm going to pass two numbers. So for example, number 1 and number 2. And now here, like I said, we need to have here the same call. So I will say sum, and I'm going to pass two numbers. So for example, I will say 5 and 7, and that's it. And inside the function we can say echo number 1 plus number 2, and let's test this. We got the result 12. And now if we want to sum some different number, so let's say here we will also say let's say like this, it will be much simple to read. Let's say 15 25. So now we can use this function to sum any two numbers. And this is just how easy it can be. But what if we just want to pass one number and we don't pass the second number? So what we can do, for example, is we can create a default value for some of the variables or some of those arguments that are here. So for example, I will say the number 2 by default is 0, which means that if we pass the second number, it will be used here, and if we do not, 0 will be applied. So I can say like this here, sum this, and let's say here like this, okay? And now you can see what is our result. Let me do it like this, okay? So now 5 plus 0 is 5. 15 plus 7 is 22, and 25 plus 0 is 0. It's important here to notice that we always, the variables that are the default, we always want to keep at the right side. So, which means we can't just say here equals 0 and that this is not default value, and then that we just want to do this. So now if we test, we can notice that there is some problems because we can't just not pass first variable. You can try something like this. For example, let's say I'm not going to pass first variable and I will do the second, and if you refresh, we got a problem again. So just keep that in mind. If you want to have some default argument, then go to the end of the function. Okay, so now I'm not sure do you understand this part, but at the moment I'm passing here only numbers. But I don't need to pass the numbers just. We can have, for example, two variables. Let's say n1 equal 10 and 2 equal 20. And here in the function sum I can say number 1, number 2. And let's say the result. Okay, so we can store the values in some variables and pass to the function. We can pass anything we want to. It can be an array, it can be other function, it can be class, whatever. So now here you can notice that we have two variables for the sum, and those variables are local. So if we, for example, say total equal, and now we will just say here, let's say nothing. And now if I try to access the informations from that variable like this, as you can see I have got a problem. It is undefined variable, which means that all variables that are inside those brackets we can't use them anywhere in the code. They are available only inside the body of the function. Also, it is not possible for us, for example, to remove this and say, let's say I will move this to the top and say I'm going to use this here. You can see I have got a lot of errors, or say this, because those variables n1 and n2 are not visible inside the body of the function. So with that said, all variables inside the body of the functions have local scope, and we cannot access the variables that are outside of the body of the function. But if we want to do that, we can do it by using the word global and then put the names of the variables that we want to use. So we will say n1, n2, and now if we try, we will get the wanted result. So if you anytime want to use the variables that are not inside the function, you will do it by saying global, then the name of the variables, and after that you can use it normally. So with that said, you can ask now, can we now from the body of the function change the value of those variables? So let's try. n1 equal 14. Okay, let's test now. It says 34, but after the function, let's try again to print this out. So as you can see, we have 34 and 14, which means that variable n1 has been changed now. So if you use global, you always be careful because you are also changing the original value of the variable. Okay, so now the next thing that I want to show you is how to use those global variables, how to manipulate them without using global inside the body of the function. So what we can say is we are going to pass two variables. We can say number 1, number 2, but I'm going to say I will use those by reference, which means this. Okay, so now I can say number 1 and number 2. So let's try now. Fresh, and as you can see, we have got the same result, which means that if we use this before the name of the variables, that means that we are accessing these variables by reference and not by value, which is big difference. If we access by reference, that means we can change those anytime we want to, but if we access only by the value, it's just like copy paste of the value and that's it, and then we work something with that. So that's very important to keep in mind. Okay, so now let me show you how to create a function that is recursive, which means that is the function that is calling itself. So for example, I will use here, let's say like this. We have start and max. Okay, and now let's say like this. If start less than max, we will say start plus end echo start, and now it will call itself again start and max. And let's now for example say sum 0, 10, 100. So let's check the result. So as you can see, what we are doing here, basically we are passing first parameter as 0, the second as 10, and maximum is 100, which means if start is less than maximum, we will each time append to the start this number here, and we will display that information, and we are going to call it again. So now we can pass any numbers. So if we want to sum all the numbers from the 0 to the 1000, we can just save, refresh, and check this. It says 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, and so on. See see the list is, of course you can say there is no reason to use something like this because we can just create a normal loop and do the same thing. That's true, but for the point of this tutorial, this is recursive function, which is really important, and you are going to use it a lot of times in your code, because sometimes you just cannot use any loop for this purpose. Okay, and the last thing that I want to show you is how to return values from your functions. So now once you know how to create function, add arguments, how to create recursive functions, the scope of the variables, the last thing is how to return whatever the function did. So for example, I will define once again two numbers. Okay, and let's say I'm going to create one local variable that will sum those two numbers. And as you can see, I'm accessing the other variables not by references but by value. And let's say my two numbers will be 5 and 10. And in order to return, so I want, when I say this echo and execute, I'm getting nothing, and I want to be able to that this function as a result return the sum of two numbers. So we can do that just by using the word return and then whatever we want to return. So for example, I want to return this variable total. So when I do this and refresh, you can see it says 15, and on this way we have returned just one information, one variable. It's important to notice here that any time that we use return in our code, it means that execution of this function will completely stop. So it doesn't matter if below here we have more code, it will just stop. Okay, and we can say here echo test, and now if we refresh, you can see that we don't see this. Okay, but we can say, for example, if different than 15, for example, return total, otherwise it will do this. So let's say it says now test. Okay, and what if we say this equal, now it says 15, and this part of the code we can see, because this part executed here, the functions just stopped whatever it does, and that's it. So this is how to return one variable, one piece of information from the function. But now the question is, and you will need to do it a lot of times, especially in the bigger projects, is how to return multiple variables, multiple pieces of information. And you are doing that just by creating an array. You can create an associative array, one-dimensional array, whatever you want, but that is just a way to do it. So for example, let's say I will create one variable, let's say response equal, and let's say in array I will return total, and I will say I'll return total multiplied by 10. Let's say function will say sum and multiply by 10. Okay, and now return the response. So what will happen now if we just do echo of this response? It says array to string conversion, so it's not possible to do that, but we are able to store the informations to some variable. for example, return value equal, and then we can use the function that will print an array. So we can see return value. So if we test this now, we can see that we have an array of 2 elements. First element with index 0 have the value 15, and the second element have the value of 150, which is normal. 15 multiplied by 10 is 150. So on this way, now we understand how to do it. And if we want just to get one value, we can say return value and say 0, which means that we are accessing the first element. And if we say 1, it will say 150. So you should know this already from arrays, because I assume that if you are learning about functions, you should know about arrays already. So guys, pretty much that's it. I think I have covered everything that you need to know and understand when we talk about the functions. So you know how to create, how to name, how to pass arguments, what is the scope of the variables, how to return some data from the function. It doesn't mean it's one or multiple pieces of information, how to do recursive functions, etc. So if you have any questions or there is anything that you don't understand, please ask in the comments below, and I will be sure to check and answer all of them. And also, if you like this video, please like it and share it with your friends. Take care.